Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar hosted by the European Biopharmaceutical Enterprises, EBE. My name is Dwayne Schultes, and today we'll be trying to answer how can legislation help make personalized medicines a reality. I am joined today by two experts as well as one interloper who's joined us in the office here. I'm joined by Bettina Rill on the phone, who's the founder of the Melanoma Patient Network, as well as a respected researcher in molecular biology. Hello, Bettina. How are you?
Hello. Nice to join you.
Thank you, Bettina. And sitting next to me is Salvatore Scalzo, who is the Policy and Legal Officer of the European Commission's DG GROW, who's handling the negotiations on the compromise text. Hello, Salvatore.
Fully correct. Hello to everybody.
Buongiorno.
Buongiorno.
And we've also been joined by Audrey Wolf from EBE. Hello, Audrey.
Hello, everybody.
I'd like to thank you all for being here. We've had 80 people register for this webinar. Even though it's a quite technical webinar, we're very glad for the audience. We will not be able to open the microphones today, so we will be taking questions through our tool. If you have a question or would like to raise a topic offline and I can chat with you, just raise your hand. We have a hand function that I can get in and drill in, and we can have a little private chat. If you're having audio trouble, we do have the ability to switch between the Skype settings, which I'm sure most of you are using, or a telephone. Switch back and forth. We have provided 24 international toll-free lines. And then we have a question bar, and at the end we will be taking questions. If any of you have questions that you would like to ask to any of our panelists, please feel free to submit them, and we will get to them as soon as we can. We'll also be taking questions amongst ourselves. So with that, I would like to pass over to Salvatore, who will make a presentation on the draft text. Thank you very much, Salvatore.
Thank you to you actually for the kind invitation. So, as already said, I'm Policy Legal Officer in the unit of the European Commission dealing with medical devices, and I worked on and I'm currently working on the negotiations on the new EU medical device regulations. So, I would like to start, first of all, by presenting what is happening in terms of regulatory developments. So, as you probably know, at the moment, medical devices within the EU are regulated by 3 directives that you can see mentioned in these slides. So 9385 on active implantable medical devices, 9342 on medical devices, and 9879 for IVDs. What will happen with the new regulations is that the directives 98385 and directive 9342 will be replaced by a new regulation on medical devices, and directive 9879 on IVDs will be replaced, is intended to be replaced by a new regulation on in vitro diagnostic medical devices. So just some information about the background and the next steps for this regulatory, regarding these regulatory developments. So the Commission presented the proposal more than 4 years ago. So it was on the 26th of September 2012, the proposal for these 2 regulations. There have been almost 4 years of negotiation before the agreement was found among the co-legislators between the Council and the Parliament. The agreement was reached on these 2 texts on the 15th of June 2016, and the agreement, which was also already baked in September 2016 by the Council at the political level. So what we are doing now is that prior to the final adoption, we are checking the technical inconsistencies. That's what we are currently working on. And the final adoption is expected on both the Council and the Parliament side in early 2017, most likely in spring 2017. So what happens after? I would like to present, I know that your interest is mostly focused on IVDs, but I would like first to give you some very important horizontal features which apply for both medical devices and IVDs. So first of all, we will have a stricter pre-market control of high-risk devices with involvement of a pool of experts at the EU level, so-called expert panels. Then we include in the regulation, under the regulation on medical devices, certain aesthetic devices, which are mentioned in Annex 15 to the regulation on medical devices. Then there is a reinforcement of the designation and oversight processes of notified bodies with the prosecution of the very good positive experience that we started a few years ago with the joint assessment at the EU level of notified bodies. The establishment of a comprehensive EU database on medical devices, which is going to be quite a great achievement for the EU and with a huge big data potential, because the idea is to have really a a tool containing all possible information regarding a lively picture of the life cycle of all devices available on the EU market. Plus, there will be the introduction of a UDI system aimed at improving traceability, device traceability, and device tracking opportunities for regulators. So there will be the reinforcement of the rules on clinical evaluation and clinical investigation, including the introduction of a coordinated assessment of the clinical investigations conducted in more than one member state. Actually, this will apply, this coordinated assessment will apply 7 years after the application date. But after 7 years from the application date, this will become compulsory. So for all those investigations that will take place in more than one member state. Then, second slide with the horizontal features, there is improved coordination between member states in the fields of both vigilance and market surveillance. So here we are in the context of the post-market surveillance activities. Then a stronger role from the Commission in the context of decisions on the regulatory status of products. At the moment, this competence relies mostly on member states. There is almost no power for the Commission except when asked specifically by a member state. In the future, the Commission on its own initiative will be in a position to take decisions on the regulatory status of products. That, of course, very good for the legal certainty for all concerned operators. Then a specific regime for devices manufactured and used in the same health institution, so-called in-house devices, which will be applicable for both MDs and IVDs. In the Commission proposal, it was only for IVDs, but after the negotiations, this was added also such exemption in the context of medical devices. And finally, there will be a clarification of the role and responsibility of economic operators, which are laid down in Chapter 2 of both regulations. And there will be a new classification system for IVDs. We will talk about this more in detail later, based on international guidance. One more thing that I guess might be of interest and I skipped, it's about that there are new obligations for manufacturers, mainly the obligation to have a financial coverage to protect and to cover basically expenses possibly related to defective products. And there are additional obligations for authorized representatives, which are those let's say, legal entities which represent EU manufacturers which have not a legal entity within the EU. So, transitional periods. These are the main ones. There are some key derogations, and I'm happy to reply to questions if there will be any on derogations to the general regime, because there are some parts of the regulation that don't follow the general rules that I'm presenting in this slide. But let's stick just to the basic information. So there will be the final adoption, the publication in the official journal, as I mentioned, expected in spring 2017. Then for the MDR, the medical device regulation, the application date will be 3 years after the entry into force. So we expect more or less spring 2020. And IVD is expected to be applicable 5 years after the entry into force, which means if everything goes as intended, the spring 2022. Then I put some information on certificates because there is still the possibility during the transitional period to reissue certificates under the old directives for up to 5 years. But anyway, those certificates will become void at the latest 4 years after the full application for the MDR and 2 years after the full application for IVDR. Now, some specific aspects regarding IVDs, taking into account that personalized medicine is the topic of today's webinar and that I guess you have specific interest in IVD regulation. So, some considerations about the scope. I think what is really important, I put in green what changes compared to the current definition of IVDs. So the main new elements are the addition of the word software, so to make clear that also software can fall under the definition of in vitro diagnostic medical devices, but probably even more important, as you can see in some of the indents, we make clear that both the genetic tests and the so-called companion diagnostics fall within this definition. It's something that we didn't have at the moment, so in terms of legal certainty, we wanted to make sure that the new definition makes clear that both genetic tests and companion diagnostics fall within it. Then, in risk classification, it's a major change, probably the most relevant one for IVDs, because at the moment in the Directive 98/79, we rely on 2 positive lists. But this was considered not to be any longer adapted to the fast pace of technological progress. And I would add also that was not in line with international guidance in this respect. So what the new regulations laid down is a new risk rule-based classification. So IVDs will be classified in the future according to 4 classes, from A, low class, to D, which is the highest class, according to 7 classification rules. And this is based on work done at the international level. You can see here the reference to the relevant document developed by the GHTF, the Global Harmonization Task Force, in 2008. What I would like also to say, while introducing also the slide on conformity assessment for IVDs in the future, is that at the moment we have only 20% of IVDs which undergo scrutiny by a notified body, so by a third entity. 80% at the moment relies on pure self-certification. This percentage will exactly be reversed under the new regulation. So under the new regulation, 80% will undergo scrutiny by notified bodies, while 20% will rely on self-certification only. So as you can see, this is really a major revolution. Conformity assessment. So as I already said, we will have a self-certification only for Class A. We estimate rather 20% of devices which are available on the market. Then for B, C, and D, we have a proportionate involvement of a notified body. For Class D, very important, we have an involvement of a reference laboratory to verify the compliance with the applicable common specifications if they are available, and the batch verification. But in the case when no common specifications are available and the device is subject to its first certification, in that case there will be also an involvement of some expert panels that will be asked, of course, to deliver an opinion. It's important to say that also in this latter case, still the reference laboratory will be asked to check the claim performance. And the second element, just for your information, is that the view of expert panels will not be binding, while the view of the reference laboratory is always binding in relation to the final notified body's decision. Finally, for companion diagnostics, a consultation procedure was introduced with the relevant pharmaceutical authority, so which means that the notified body, before taking its final decision, will have to consult a relevant pharmaceutical authority when he needs to decide on a companion diagnostic. So finally, we are just a few words about the performance evaluation. Like for medical devices, there is a reinforcement of performance evaluation requirements for the approval and throughout the lifetime of the device. Actually, there are many new rules regarding especially post-market surveillance for devices. But performance evaluation in the context of IVD is mainly relevant to demonstrate the scientific validity, the analytical performance, and the clinical performance of the IVD. And then there are specific requirements for certain type of performance studies, so which means a certain approval and registration regime. And this is valid also for those devices, let's say also for those performance studies which involve companion diagnostics, except in the case where the study relies only on leftover samples. In that case, there is no, let's say, there are no the specific requirements do not apply. So this is more or less all on my side. Of course, I'm more than happy to take questions on whatever aspect, both for IVDs and medical devices. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Salvatore. A couple things. We have a lot of these classifications revolving through an expert group or expert panel of some type. Now, is this going to utilize the existing healthcare efficiency panel that currently exists with Helmut Brand, or is this going to be a new panel that's going to be put together? How do you envision that in the current negotiations?
Let's say that an implementing act is intended to establish these expert panels. I think this will have to be built from scratch.
Sure.
So probably, of course, experiences in the pharma sector will be certainly taken into account, will serve as a basis for reference, but this work will have to be done. Basically, we will have really to to design in the next 3 years, actually, during the transitional period, how these expert panels will work. So at the moment, what the text says is that notified bodies will have to ask for an opinion, and also very important, because that was a concern for everybody, that there is a maximum deadline for that opinion.
Right.
So, which is a very important element, because we want to make sure that the approval of the device is not delayed, is not delayed too much. So there is a maximum of 60 days.
Yeah.
That are available for the panel to deliver its opinion.
Because right now, FDA certainly in their their medical apps procedure is basically defined 2 categories. Again, sort of the 20-80 rule that we have, where 20% need to go for FDA approval and 80% are sort of self-regulated. So we're actually adding quite a bit of, a higher processing here. How are you going to address the concerns that people are going to say, whoa, this is going to take too long? How are you going to make sure that that doesn't happen?
But let's say that, as I said, you mean for the high risk?
Yeah.
For the high risk where there is an involvement.
Yeah, and it's in a secondary labs as well. You're doing secondary laboratory verification.
Yeah, perfect. No, the idea is that 60 days is the maximum amount of days in any case, so that it is very important. So we make sure that the control to be done by the reference laboratory and the opinion to be delivered by the expert panel, they run in parallel. Sure. So after 60 days, the notified body is in a position to take a decision. And of course, so I think this was considered to be a kind of reasonable period. Sure. We're not talking about 6 months or 1 year. We are talking about 60 days, which were. Sure. Yeah. So and to make them run in parallel, that was an important principle that we wanted to keep.
Excellent. We're going to move on now. Obviously, we encourage you, if you're in the audience, to submit some questions. I see we've already had a few questions come in. That's excellent. I'm now going to be turning to Bettina. Bettina, before we kick off your presentation, do you have any questions for Salvatore, or you just want to speed through and then we can pick up your questions at the end?
I think maybe we wait till after my presentation, because I think it makes a bit clear where I'm coming from.
That's fine. So Bettina, I'd like to pass the baton to you. Bettina obviously is a well-known patient advocate and a well-respected researcher in molecular biology. Bettina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to share with you now, I think, what will be a very different perspective on companion diagnostics. So just a bit about my background. So I have a medical degree, and then, as Duane already said, a PhD in molecular biology. But I'm here in my function as a patient advocate because I founded a European patient network after losing my husband to melanoma in 2012. And today is the bit why someone like a patient advocate actually should be interested in particular companion diagnostics and the role these play in a disease like melanoma. If we could move to the next slide, please. For a bit of context, we lose currently about 22,000 people to melanoma in stage 4. Melanoma is the most vicious type of skin cancer that anyone can get, traditionally starting from a mole that becomes dysplastic and then mutates, but it can start in any body surface or also inner linings of the body. Historically, the median survival once metastatic was 6 to 9 months, so this is a patient population with high unmet need. And this has now changed dramatically over the last 5 years with the approval of not 1 but actually 2 new classes of therapies. And I think we're a bit of a prime example of what works very well with diagnostics and what also does not work and where there are huge gaps. What makes melanoma specific is that roughly 50% of all melanoma patients have tumors that carry an activating BRAF mutation, which basically is the equivalent of a broken off switch in a protein kinase. And these tumors are, because the tumors are highly addicted to the BRAF pathway, these tumors respond extremely well to targeted agents blocking this, either the mutated BRAF mutation or a step further down in the pathway. And hold on, it's like, if we now move to the next one, I would like first to explain a bit why this has been a huge success story for us. Initially, one tried to treat metastatic melanoma with chemotherapy or local radiotherapy, none of which was highly effective. So it was only able to work slightly on progression-free survival, but didn't affect overall survival positively. Now, when it was discovered that melanoma these tumors were so addictive to the BRAF pathway, the first attempts were made with targeted agents in an unselected patient population, and the results didn't look very, very promising, until one realized that it was actually the subgroup of patients that were carrying this activating mutation. And then I'm sure you will remember what went even through the common press, this patient riddled with tumors, because melanomas grow under the skin, so you will have like blobs all over the body responding magically in a very short amount of time to these new drugs. So this has become one of something that we consider, or for melanoma patient, it has been close to a miracle. And basically at the very beginning, because my husband was diagnosed in 2011, and at that time these drugs were very new and still only available either in clinical trials or early access programs, these tests were actually not widely available. My husband himself participated in a phase 3 clinical study, not for a BRAF inhibitor, but for a MEK inhibitor targeting the same pathway. And at the time, actually, the tests were not performed like with what we're using today, like the COBAS test, which is an RT-PCR based test detecting one specific or the most frequent BRAF V600E mutation preferably, but was still done with sequencing in parallel. And while nowadays such a test can be run in 90 to 120 minutes, we waited a couple of days and even longer for the sequencing result. So this has happened just now in 5 years, and I can tell you that for a patient, knowing that these promising drugs are out there, but whether they will be of any use to you will strictly depend on you having this activating, or your tumors, not you, the tumors having the activating mutation makes a huge difference from a patient perspective. If we could move to the next slide. This is actually the data that shows you what happens if you use a double inhibition to the pathway. So dabrafenib is a BRAF inhibitor, and trametinib is a MEK inhibitor, which is one step further down the pathway. If you remember that I said that overall survival was 6 to 9 months. So now with a double combination, you have an overall survival that is close to 80% after a year. So at the time when my husband was diagnosed, it was close to 10%. So this has made a huge difference in our patient population. What is of interest from a patient perspective is that these tests, while fast and reliable if you're carrying the most frequent mutation, are not as reliable for different mutations that also occur in the BRAF mutant. They also affect the V600 position, but are not the common E mutation. And the COBAS test does not pick them up with the same kind of frequency. These patients, however, do respond to targeted therapy. So for a patient, knowing that the test is not 100% reliable is critical. And you might be aware that the age distribution of the presence of these BRAF mutation is uneven. So the younger a patient, the higher the likelihood that the tumors will be BRAF positive, and the older the patient, the higher the likelihood that patients that the tumors are actually negative. So this has kind of led now to some, I say, pragmatic approach that if you have, let's say, a 25-year-old with a melanoma testing negative in whatever BRAF test, usually this will lead to retesting, and it actually happens quite frequently that it is either a technical mistake, which does happen, or a rarer BRAF mutation. Now, if you now look at the curves, it seems to be that you start, if you go to the left side at 0 to 2 months, you have a plateau, and then it seems kind of the curve tails out. This is just part of the truth. If you look to the very early data of BRAF inhibitors in melanoma, you would see a shoulder, usually with a steep drop around 6 to 8 months, and then unfortunately converging against like a very low percentage of survival. The data we're seeing now is due to the higher effectiveness of the combinations of BRAF plus MEK inhibition instead of BRAF inhibition, what we tested initially. and that these patients, once they do progress on these targeted therapies, do not simply go home and die, but move on to immune therapies, which produce this typical tail of the curve. Now, the shoulder was a huge problem in melanoma, and this is actually an example of where I think we would need better diagnostic tests, because what we have seen is what I consider misuse of testing. Different, either used as panels or as NGS, and let me explain a bit why this was problematic, or still contains, still is a huge problem for our patients. While the tumors respond extremely well initially to BRAF inhibition, we have seen, like my husband had, like tumors disappear within 3 days on MEK inhibition. So this is like a clinical miracle. Unfortunately, this only lasts for a certain time. Usually, if you with a BRAF monotherapy, the tumors become resistant around half a year after initiation of the therapy. A MEK inhibitor alone usually has resistance after 5 months already, and if you have a combination, you end up around 9 to 10 months. At that time, the tumors do no longer respond to BRAF inhibition, and we have seen, unfortunately, that because probably this is driven by the fact that melanoma is the most genetically unstable tumors of all cancers, find not one but a number of ways to become resistant to the pathway inhibition. So what has happened is that patients with resistant tumors then would sometimes pay privately considerable amounts of money to get panels tested on their tumor masses, and then would get a readout that would suggest a drug to be used at that point in time. Fully knowing that, or well, if you understand that the tumors are actually heterogeneous, you know that you have to analyze this data with I think supreme caution, because it is obviously not just the presence of a certain mutation that will predict whether this tumor will respond to a certain inhibition, but it's also how much of the tumor actually carries that mutation. And we've seen a couple of cases where desperate patients paid quite considerable amounts out of pocket to then be given information that was clinically either could not be acted upon, or they then went on to a drug that finally proved not to be of benefit. And understanding the science behind that, one could have predicted that before. And I would like, from a patient advocacy perspective, this is something that in my opinion, shouldn't be happening. So we need tests that are based on science and where we actually have valid clinically implications coming out of that. If we now could move to the next slide, please. This is now, I mentioned that we just didn't have only one, but actually 2 new classes of therapies coming through melanoma, and this is a checkpoint inhibitor. These drugs work by inhibiting inherent breaks in our immune system. Usually what happens is if our body starts mounting an immune response, automatically a negative feedback loop kicks in, that in the end ensures that this immune response comes to a halt, because otherwise we would end up with autoimmune diseases all over. And these therapies, this is a CTLA-4 antibody, basically interferes with this negative feedback loop. Melanoma, probably because of its high genetic instability previously mentioned, is a tumor that produces a high number of neoantigens, so proteins on the surface of cells that are then recognized by the body's own immune system, and by interfering with the negative feedback loop, it is possible to maintain a sustained immune response attacking the tumor. What has been fascinating, well, what we don't like about these curves, if you look at the left curve, is the left one, which the free drop very initially. So that means just that only a sub part of the patient actually responds to these therapies, but it is the tail with a big red arrow which gets a community like ours excited, because that means that there are people actually alive after a long time, and that a disease where hardly anyone survived 1 year is what gives hope. The inflection point seems to be at around 3 years, so we now consider that if you manage to stay alive 3 years on immune therapy, your chances are that you actually will continue to survive. The level, of course, is quite low. We have now new drugs that are doing better. But I think this is a very, dramatic example. Why would one want to understand who actually ends up on that very tail? Because unfortunately, these drugs come with considerable side effects. Already, ipilimumab, so this is the CTLA-4 antibody presented here, which comes with considerable gastrotoxicity. The colitis has, at the beginning, we lost patients due to colitis because of bowel perforation. The newer drugs, and especially when used in combination, can be even more toxic, inducing not only short-term toxicity but also long-term, often endocrine side effects. And so allowing us to find out who responds and also the ones who are going to have the side effects would have a huge impact. Not only on the clinical side, because as I said, the side effects are considerable. These drugs also come with a hefty price tag, so healthcare systems have been would be very, very keen to be able to target these expensive and toxic drugs to the patients with most likely to respond and to survive. We have seen in the past that PD-L1 expression has been used, and I think this is another case where we from our side are not very happy with what is currently going on. At the moment, we don't really know how to measure PD-L1 expression levels. There are different antibodies used, so simply on stainings. They are often not compatible across, and you will all be aware what has happened in the very recent trial where the PD-1 antibodies from two competing companies have been tested both in non-small lung cancer. And it makes no sense that if you think that they're both targeting the same protein, that one study was positive and the other one was negative, merely based on the selection criteria for inclusion into their trial. For patients, this can come out as a big disaster, because we had a similar case in melanoma where we could see that patients whose tumors had high expression levels of PD-L1 responded better to PD-1 inhibition than the ones who with lower PD-L1 expression levels. However, at the same time, the next best therapy available, which would be ipilimumab, which you see on this slide here, has a considerably lower overall survival rate, so that even if you were responding not optimally, you would still respond better than to the next best available drug. We have seen restriction by payers based on their tests, so we are very keen on finding reliable tests, and it has been shown that PD-L1 is actually an inducible factor which can change over the course of a disease. And for patients, this then directly results in access or lack of access, and that might then make the difference whether you end up on the tail of the curve or not. So this, I think, for a bit of like a clinical and a personal perspective on how very exciting new drugs become difficult to handle or hard to access if we lack the necessary tests to either limit toxicity or ensure access to the patients in most need. And with that, we can jump to the next slide, and I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bettina. I'd like to just drill in a couple questions. I invite the other panelists who are here, Audrey and Salvatore as well, to jump in. I'm very interested in these checkpoint inhibitors. We've been doing a lot of research at these in vital transformation for the last year. What's intriguing with these is you have, as you see here, a very long tail with roughly 25 to 30% of the patient pool responding extremely well. But as you also mentioned, roughly a 50% adverse event ratio related to these, and there are no diagnostics currently available to determine these patient populations and segmentations. As the topic of the webinar is, how can we use regulation to sort this stuff out? Bettina, from a patient perspective, what would you like to see happen from a regulatory perspective with Salvatore here, obviously? If you want to ask a question or make a comment, what would you like to see in order to be able to address this? Because this seems to me both exciting and challenging at the same time.
So I think that already a coordinated approach is of great benefit to patients, because any type of fragmentation, or we've seen that whatever the process, any type of fragmentation in healthcare system usually means delay in access for patients. As you've seen, melanoma is a population that has no time to lose. So for me, the degree of coordination that will allow for faster moving forward, I think, is critical. When it comes to the side effects, we have seen that with better management and earlier diagnosis, one is able to anticipate a lot of the toxicity. So there is something one can do with clinical management. At the same time, of course, it would be nice if we could say that because what is currently used is a combination of a CTLA-4 with a PD-1 antibody, which comes with very high toxicity and a high response. But some patients might be fine with just the PD-1 monotherapy, which is considerably less toxic. So if we could find out who needs what, that for me would be enormous. And also from what I see, coordination on the level of data is crucial, because I don't think that we will need the access to data from across Europe in order to solve this problem.
Yeah, agreed. Salvatore, how do you see this moving forward under the current negotiation? Do you see any room here to try and make sure that we're doing things faster, better, quicker, taking these things under consideration?
Let's say that, of course, first of all, it's important to stress, I fully agree, first of all, with what was said, but also the current possibilities at the EU level are also relatively limited, I would say, because when we talk about these regulations, the legal basis for these regulations is the internal market legal basis, mainly, which is related to the free circulation of products within the EU. So we deal basically at the EU level, we are dealing with the safety and performance characteristics of the devices which are available on the market. Then making available the control of the strict control of the healthcare market very much lies, as you know, health is a matter which is the competence of member states. That's so there are many factors which intervene. So we are just as the Commission with these regulations, we deal only, unfortunately, but only with just one aspect of this complex system, which is the, let's say, with the safety and performance requirements for these devices. So, but I think on our side, what we try to ensure, at least within this framework, was that the data and the scientific data upon which these devices are put on the market can be more robust. And that's for sure. That was a decision which we try to reflect as much as possible in the regulation when we talk about safety and performance requirements, when we talk about the new regulation on performance evaluations and performance studies. Then a second big issue is to favor the involvement or more scientific expertise into the process. And we mentioned the expert panels, but also the pharmaceutical relevant competent authorities that will have now a say in the approval process of companion diagnostics. The third thing was, which I also consider very much important, to create also a big tool for both, mainly for regulators, because we will see all the data. But I would say for the general public, we will have a tool within the EU that will contain a huge amount of data on devices which are available on the EU market. And that, I think, it's something not to be not negligible. It's a tool where we will put together all data related to the life cycle of all devices. So it's a huge amount of information that can be used at different levels, of course, by operators, manufacturers, researchers, and regulators in their regulatory activities.
But you also say at one point in your presentation that you have improved coordination between member states in the field of vigilance and surveillance. Okay, that's post-market, that's understood. But is there some vision there to try and move this to greater coordination broadly, even at authorization? Is there some vision for the European Commission to try and help expedite that process at all, or is the greater collaboration going to try and foster a better DG grow environment for European SMEs? Is that a hope? Leading question of the day, I suppose.
But I think it's, I mean, when within this regulation, of course, the vigilance and market surveillance activities are mostly intended to cover the aspect of control of the safety of products. Let's say aspects which are more about how the market is functioning, whether devices are properly made accessible, are aspects which are unfortunately outside of our framework. So I know from our health colleagues in DG Santé that of course they're working also to improve that aspect. So that cooperation among member states in terms of see how marketing is functioning, whether patients can have the right access to devices, let's say, without too much delay. So these are aspects which I would say are a bit, your concern, the way I see it, is unfortunately outside
of course
the regulatory framework which are currently set down. When we talk about vigilance and market surveillance, as I already mentioned, we really see at those activities of regulators and manufacturers which are aimed at detect on time safety issues with device, and to exchange among them, of course, this data, so to make sure that other member states can take safety measures on time, let's say, to prevent incidents on the market.
I'd like to point out that we are getting some questions. We'll be answering your questions here. Please feel free to submit the questions. We have 4 questions that have come in. We'll be getting to them. Audrey, you will have a question that you'd like to ask? Yes.
Yes, indeed. I will have a question for Salvatore. I'm representing the biopharmaceutical industry. And we do agree with the fact that the regulation is definitely going to improve the situation, specifically looking at companion diagnostics from our side. We have a question, though, regarding the way this is going to happen practically, because we welcome the fact that EMA and competent authorities will be more involved in the process, but in the text, in the regulation itself, it's not very clear how this is going to happen. So I was wondering if the Commission was planning to develop an implementing act, or how will this be clarified?
You mean the way the
way notified bodies and EMA and competent authorities are going to interact?
If I can also jump in, Andre Broekmans from the Netherlands has written in, what is meant by pharmaceutical authority? Is this a regulatory authority, a medicinal products authority, EMA? So again, it's a part of your question, and thank you for the question, Andre. So there's just, how do we define these different organizations and where will it live?
Yeah, no, this is something that I know I'm aware of this issue. So at the moment we will try already to make things already clear within the text, probably prior to the adoption. So this is something we are working about. Plus, of course, as the Commission, we have the possibility also during the transitional period. I would say there is not a specific empowerment for an implementing act in this context, but for sure, when we have the possibility to issue guidance, for example, should there be any specific issue with this? Yeah.
Because the interaction as well between EMA and competent authorities and notified bodies is definitely not clear. They're providing an opinion, EMA, to notified bodies. How is this going to be followed? What if the notified bodies decide not to follow the opinion?
In that sense, it is already explained. I think I also, it's something I tried to mention at the beginning, that the only binding opinion for notified bodies is the one expressed by a reference laboratory.
Yes.
For all other opinions, there is no direct binding consequence. So that's so the notified body will remain, let's say, the body which decides at the end of the day if the device is going to be approved or not. Of course, you will have to take into account that opinion. So this is the way. In that sense, the text is already quite explicit in that sense. Yeah.
But then if the EMA would have a divergent opinion,
they should justify why their opinion is divergent. I hope, I think we have, I don't know, similar experiences from other sectors in this respect, that normally the notified body, of course, tends to follows. That's what we follows the opinion, either that will be the opinion of an expert panel or a competent authority, because especially when you evaluate a companion diagnostic where the authority must deliver an opinion on the suitability of that device in relation to the concerned pharmaceutical, to the concerned medicinal product, it will be really difficult for a notified body to diverge, I would say, if an opinion is negative. So I think and I hope that de facto the notified body will stick to the scientific opinion provided by the relevant body.
Okay. Sure. We've got a good question here from Steve Lee. And Steve Lee, Bettina, just so you know, Steve Lee would like to thank you for sharing your story and your opinion. He has a question regarding access to data. Will the new regulations require public access to the performance study reports? Bettina, from your perspective as a patient advocate, what would you like to see happen, and are you aware of what is going to happen?
Well, of course, for us, well, let's put it that way. I think access to data is one of these tricky things to discuss, and something that we've seen that we have seen even in our own community is that people whose lives are not directly at risk, so anyone with an early melanoma, is usually rather concerned about privacy issues. If your life is at stake, people are rather less concerned. So to answer that question, we would like to see a sharing of that data, because I think, as Salvatore already mentioned, there is a lot of valuable information in there. For example, something that I would be very interested in is the coverage of these tests. We've just seen a case of a patient on a forum who's been operated and with a tumor in the gut. And it has taken 3 months to find out it's melanoma, and there's still no BRAF test done. So something like this, I think we should be able to pick up. So I would be interested more from this kind of, like, I guess it's more public health issue. I'm not really aware of what's going to happen with these texts, so maybe Salvatore is rather the person to ask that question.
So how is the data usage? Is there any negotiation on the data usage as part of the compromise agreement?
But let's say that, I mean, the compromise is there. We tried, of course, to make available, generally speaking, as much information as possible, of course taking into account data which might be considered as confidential. This is a domain which is normally very sensitive for member states, but yeah, also. But I think what will be very important is that, for example, the summary of any clinical investigation or performance study will be made public. Plus, the new regulation introduces in Article 26 the public available nature of a summary of safety and clinical performance of every device, which would be made also available in Udemy. So I think this is also a major improvement to provide relevant information, public information to all concerned people, from operators to patients. So I would say that as an overall assessment, and also if you look through the text, because of course we have several provisions which relate to what is available, publicly available, and what is not, but I would say the large part of information on for all UDAM, the future UDAMED modules, will be really made publicly available. So I think that the compromise goes in the right direction, at least from our point of view.
Excellent, thank you. We have another question here from Silvia Chuato. Will the new regulations notify body, will the excuse me, let me start again. With the new regulations, will notified bodies have the same remit as the CDRH currently has?
The same? Sorry.
CDRH.
No, I have the same?
Same remit, the same power.
Okay, perfect. Meaning exactly what?
Will the notifying bodies have the same, is it overlapping, or is this going to replace the CDRH-NS? Unknown?
Will notified bodies have the same in CDRH? In the US, they mean CDRH? Or
don't know.
I guess.
Should we check on that and get back?
It's, yeah. If
US CDRH. Thank you, thank you, Sylvia.
With respect to which, what do you mean exactly? The remit related to which exact responsibilities? Just for me to understand.
Does it, I guess, does the European, does it override the CDRH, or is there collaboration between the two?
Let's say that, but then of course the person can elaborate his or her question further. But first of all, it's very important to say that, and that was part of the discussion which took place, like a very important topic of discussion during the negotiations, what's the function of the notified body in the new system. As you know, at the beginning also, when the Commission drafted its own impact assessment, several options were elaborated in terms of who does what in the context of the approval of devices, and there was also an option of involving a regulatory agency, for example, for the approval of high-risk devices. I would say that the decision now, as the text stands, was to leave the responsibility and the legal responsibility for the decision to the notified bodies in general. And this is also the reason why, when we look at the involvement of the expert panels, this is something we were discussing before, it was clearly stated that the notified body takes the opinion into account. But where we, like the entity which holds the legal responsibility is the processing, is the notified body. I don't know if it's the clarification of the regulation would be made prior.
No, that's a different question.
It's a different question. Okay. Yeah. I don't know if that was the rationale of the question, but this is very important to take into account. So the final decision, except for those cases where an opinion is binding. For example, we mentioned in the IVD context the case of reference laboratory. In that case, the notified body must follow the opinion. It's an exceptional case. Otherwise, the notified body. Then we need to say that the process for the designation and the monitoring of the notified bodies is really, really very much strengthened. So we really reinforce with the new regulations the process of joint assessment, which is producing already since 2013 very good results, which means that before the control of notified bodies before 2013 was done only at the national level at the member state level, while now we have a control which is done also with the participation of experts from the Commission and from other member states. So a kind of EU-wide process of oversight of every notified body. And we are going even to strengthen this process further under the new regulation. So in general, so the idea is that, okay, the notified body will hold the major responsibility in the new system, but the control of the notified body will be very much stronger. So we make sure that we find a good compromise.
Bettina, coming back to you, from your standpoint, how important is alignment and regulatory oversight on the diagnostics regulation between the U.S. and Europe? How much do you see this as a key to what you're trying to accomplish?
Well, I mean, I think it's grossly simplified. Any type of alignment tends to help with speed, and if you're interested in speed, alignment is good. At the same time, I believe one cannot force these things because, of course, our healthcare systems operate very differently and we have very different traditions, and our institutions are linked to our national authorities. So I don't think that force is the way to go, but I obviously hope that alignment will grant earlier access for patients, and especially in companion diagnostics, because it is not, for me, there's a huge difference between a device, like something that you would implement, let's say, or like implant, or something that will define whether you can access a medicine. And we have seen that just the testing already for our melanoma drugs took a considerable amount of time and directly affected us. So I do hope for alignment.
Thank you, Bettina. We have a question here from Emma Dufour. Hello, Emma. Thank you for submitting your question. Salvatore, you made reference to clarifications to the regulations which will be made prior to adoption of the text, sort of a semi-consultation, it sounds like. Can you elaborate further on this process and what are the steps to full adoption?
Yeah. So let's say that the text that you can already find on the Council website, so on the Consilium website, it's publicly available. It's the text that more or less is going to be, at least from a political perspective, in terms of general issues discussed, that is going to be the final text. So let's start from this.
95%?
But I would say yes. Yeah, I cannot read. It's difficult to to mention a percentage. But let's say yes, because of course, after the agreement, at this point in time, what we are allowed to do is only to check technical inconsistencies. We are not allowed, let's say, in principle, to go beyond that. So to modify compromises which were already found among the legislators. So at the moment, the three institutions, so the Council, the Parliament, and the Commission, we are working towards checking together technical inconsistencies, correcting them, and then making this text final for the adoption. So the text, it's difficult at the moment to indicate an exact calendar, but as I mentioned, the Council, both the Council and the Parliament should adopt it as a final text in March or April. It will be around spring anyway, spring. Then after the adoption, the text is published in the official journal, and 20 days later it's the day of entry to force. So when we say that the application will be 3 years after the entry to force, we refer exactly to 20 days after the publication of the text in the official journal. So that is more or less the steps which are going to be taken. So which means that as as it was mentioned before, the text is more or less the one, basically the one which was agreed in June. There might be, of course, some, whenever we detect an inconsistency or something to be clarified, that's something on which we can also intervene at this stage. One more, just because Bettina's intervention made, like on the need for alignment in the context of companion diagnostics, I would like just to raise one point, that is to say that I think that there were two things that at least aim at reaching a positive alignment also with the US counterpart. First of all, the definition. If we look at the definition of companion diagnostics as it was in the Commission proposal and as it is now, as it stands now in the final text, for sure there was a clear attempt to align as much as possible to the definition of companion diagnostic that we have in the US. There are some differences, but the direction was towards alignment. And also the involvement of a relevant pharmaceutical authority. I would also say that this is a second big element that signals a kind of will of alignment between the EU legislation and the US legislation.
Excellent. Bettina, any comment?
Great. No, I'm happy.
With that, brevity is the spice of life. Thank you very much, all four of you. Audrey, thank you for your hospitality today. Bettina, thank you very much for your time on the phone. Always a pleasure to speak to you, Bettina.
Likewise.
Thank you. And Salvatore, pleasure meeting you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I'd like to thank all of you for your questions. We'll be getting the material out, circulated after review with the PowerPoints and a list of the questions. And I'd like to thank all of you for your participation today. And with that, this webinar is concluded. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great.
There you go.
Thank you very much.